My billionaire boss fired me at the peak of a treacherous mountain pass because I refused to drive a tanker with failing brakes. He laughed, calling me just a liquid hauler, and abandoned me in the snow. 10 minutes later, his replacement driver lost control, spilling 10,000 gallons of fuel. So, I made one phone call to a federal agent and systematically dismantled his entire corporate empire. Chapter 1. The Scent of Burning Brake Dust. At 4:15 a.m., the staging yard was a frozen wasteland of diesel fumes and black ice. I am Graham Kelly. I've been hauling heavy liquid freight for almost 30 years, and I know the heartbeat of every rig I drive. The rig assigned to me today, Unit 404, was already coughing like a sick dog when I fired up the engine. But it wasn't the engine that worried me. It was the sharp, metallic tang lingering in the frosty air. It was the undeniable acrid scent of burning brake dust from the previous shift. I climbed down from the cab, my heavy winter boots crunching against the frosted asphalt. I slid my heavy-duty flashlight under the rear axles of the massive tanker. The brake pads were worn down entirely to the metal rivets, the drums deeply scarred and grooved. Taking this 80,000-pound bomb down the steep, winding inclines of Dead Man's Pass wasn't just dangerous. It was an absolute catastrophe waiting to happen. I marched straight into the dispatch office, bringing the bitter, biting cold in with me. Tom Higgins, our dispatch supervisor, was hiding behind his glowing monitors. He was a nervous man who always looked like he was bracing for a physical punch. "Tom," I said, my voice cutting sharply through the annoying hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. "Unit 404 is officially grounded. The trailer brakes are completely shot. I need the lead mechanic out here immediately." Tom winced, his eyes darting anxiously toward the frosted window. "Graham? Yeah, you know Jasper's new policy. No unscheduled maintenance delays. That load of premium aviation fuel absolutely has to reach the Summit Depot by 8 a.m. "I don't care if it's hauling liquid gold," I shot back, slapping my thick, calloused palm against his flimsy desk. "If I take that heavy rig over the pass, those brakes will boil over. I'm not risking my life or anyone else's for Jasper Ward's profit margins." Jasper Ward was our corporate fleet tycoon. He was the kind of man who wore custom-tailored suits that cost more than I made in a year and viewed his experienced drivers as merely disposable steering wheel holders. He had recently slashed the garage maintenance budget to fund his new vacation home, leaving us with rolling death traps. "You have to run it, Graham," Tom pleaded, his voice cracking slightly under the pressure. "Jasper is already furious about the quarterly profit reports. Yet he said anyone who refuses a dispatch today is fired on the spot." I stared at Tom, feeling a cold, hard knot tighten in my stomach. The tension in the tiny office was suffocating. I wasn't just a driver. I was a professional who respected the brutal physics of a loaded tanker on a 10% downgrade. "Log it, Tom," I said slowly, deliberately making sure the security camera in the top corner caught my face. "I am officially notifying dispatch that Unit 404 is severely unsafe for operation due to critical brake failure." Before Tom could type a single word into the system, the office door flew violently open. Jasper Ward stood there, his face flushed with wealthy arrogance. The real storm had just arrived. Chapter 2. The Mountain Pass Dismissal. Jasper Ward stepped into the dispatch office at 4:32 a.m., his bringing with him the heavy scent of expensive designer cologne that completely masked the smell of honest, hard work. He looked at me with pure disdain, his perfectly manicured hands resting confidently on his hips. "Is there a problem here, Kelly?" Jasper demanded, his voice dripping with unbearable condescension. "Or are you just finding pathetic excuses to delay my freight again?" "The trailer brakes on 404 are completely gone, Jasper," I replied, standing my ground. "It needs a full service before it touches the highway. If it goes down the pass, it is simply not stopping." Jasper scoffed loudly, rolling his eyes as if I had just complained about a minor scratch on the paint. "You truck drivers are all exactly the same, always whining about the equipment. You aren't mechanics or engineers, Kelly. You are just liquid haulers. You hold a steering wheel and press a pedal. And that is the absolute extent of your value to my corporation." The insult hung in the cold room, heavy and offensive. "I am not driving it," I stated firmly. Jasper's eyes narrowed into cold, calculating slits. "Fine. You want to play hardball? I will ride with you to the summit right now. If the truck makes it up the pass, you take it down the other side. If you refuse, you are fired immediately, and I will have another driver take it from the peak." "Get in the cab." Against my better judgment, but needing to aggressively prove my point, I climbed into the driver's seat. Jasper sat in the passenger seat, his luxury coat brushing against the worn, cracked vinyl. By 5:45 a.m., we were grinding our way up the steep, treacherous incline of Dead Man's Pass. The heavy diesel engine roared aggressively, fighting the incredible weight of the aviation fuel trying to drag us backward. The climb was agonizingly slow. While every time I had to tap the brakes for a tight switchback, the pedal felt dangerously spongy and weak. The harsh metallic grinding sound echoed loudly through the frozen canyon, a terrifying symphony of impending mechanical failure. Jasper simply stared at his bright phone screen, completely ignoring the blatant, screaming warning signs. At 6:30 a.m., we finally reached the snow-covered summit pull-off. I threw the parking brake with a loud, aggressive hiss of air and turned to face him. "Well, we made it up strictly because we were fighting gravity," I explained, keeping my voice dangerously calm. "Going down is a totally different story. The drums are already overheating just from the switchbacks. I am absolutely not taking this tanker down the other side." Jasper practically snarled. "Then you are officially terminated, Kelly. Get out of my truck." "You are firing me out here? It is 10 degrees outside, Jasper. I do not care if it is freezing." "You refused a direct corporate order. Tom already dispatched a replacement driver who actually wants to work. He is pulling up behind us in the company escort vehicle right now." I grabbed my heavy duffel bag and stepped out into the biting, brutal wind. Jasper watched with a smug, arrogant grin. I stood in the snow as the replacement driver climbed in, knowing they had absolutely no idea what disaster they were about to unleash. Chapter 3, 10,000 Gallons. I stood shivering on the snowy shoulder of Dead Man's Pass at 6:45 a.m., zipping my heavy jacket up to my chin. The replacement driver, a young kid who looked barely old enough to hold a commercial license, gave me a nervous nod before releasing the air brakes on Unit 404. Jasper Ward sped away in his heated luxury SUV, leaving the kid to navigate the treacherous descent alone. I managed to flag down a passing snowplow to catch a ride back down the mountain. Biz, the driver, a grizzled local, kept the radio tuned to the state highway patrol frequency. For the first 10 minutes, the descent was quiet. The rhythmic thumping of the plow blade against the asphalt was the only sound in the warm cab. Then, at exactly 7:02 a.m., the radio exploded with chaotic static. "Dispatch, we have a code red emergency on the lower switchbacks of Dead Man's Pass. I repeat, code red. A commercial tanker has lost control. Brakes are smoking heavily. While he is blowing his horn and picking up massive speed." My blood ran ice cold. I knew exactly what was happening. The heavy aviation fuel was pushing the rig down the 10% grade, and the worn-out brake pads had completely glazed over. The kid had absolutely no stopping power. He was riding an 80,000-pound missile directly toward the valley floor. "Step on it," I told the plow driver, my voice tight with dread. "That's my old rig." By the time we navigated the winding turns and reached the 3-mile marker, a massive plume of thick black smoke was already billowing into the pale morning sky. The smell of raw, uncombusted aviation fuel was overpowering, stinging my eyes and burning my throat. We rounded the final curve, and the devastation was absolute. Unit 404 had failed to negotiate the sharpest hairpin turn. The massive rig had slammed violently into the reinforced concrete retaining wall, tearing the aluminum tanker wide open like a cheap tin can. 10,000 gallons of highly flammable premium aviation fuel was gushing out, flooding across the highway and spilling directly down into the pristine mountain creek below. The environmental damage alone was going to be completely catastrophic. First responders were already swarming the scene. I jumped out of the plow and sprinted toward the wreckage. Officer James, a state highway patrolman I recognized from years on the road, was dragging the young driver out of the shattered cab. Miraculously, the kid was alive, though battered and deeply in shock. "The brakes!" the kid stammered, coughing violently as I knelt beside him in the snow. "I pushed the pedal straight to the floor, man. There was nothing there. It just wouldn't stop." "I know, kid," I said softly, placing a reassuring hand on his trembling shoulder. "It wasn't your fault." I stood up and looked at the raging river of fuel destroying the mountainside. And Jasper Ward thought he could silence me by leaving me in the cold. He thought he could cut corners to line his silk pockets without consequences. but as I watched the toxic fuel seep into the earth, a fiery, unstoppable anger ignited inside me. Jasper hadn't just fired a driver today. He had awakened a nightmare. The time for corporate revenge had officially begun. Chapter 4. The blame game begins. At 8:15 a.m., the mountain pass was completely transformed into an absolute disaster zone. The flashing red and blue lights from the emergency vehicles painted the pristine white snow with frantic pulsing colors. The overpowering stench of 10,000 gallons of raw aviation fuel burned my nostrils and made my eyes water continuously. I stood behind the thick yellow caution tape, my arms crossed tightly across my chest to block the biting, freezing wind, watching the hazardous materials team scramble frantically. At precisely 9 a.m., a sleekish black luxury SUV angrily tore through the police barricades, sliding slightly on the icy asphalt before coming to a dramatic halt. Jasper Ward threw open his door, his expensive leather shoes instantly sinking into the toxic, fuel-soaked slush. His face was twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. He completely ignored the shivering, traumatized young driver sitting in the back of the ambulance. Instead, Jasper marched directly toward Officer James. Pointing a manicured finger aggressively. "This is entirely driver error," Jasper shouted, his voice echoing loudly off the steep granite cliffs. "That incompetent kid must have been speeding. And where is Kelly? Graham Kelly deliberately sabotaged my equipment before he abandoned his post this morning. I want him arrested immediately for destroying my corporate property." Officer James calmly held up a heavy-gloved hand, completely unfazed by the billionaire's theatrical tantrum. "Mr. Ward, we are conducting a thorough investigation. The skid marks clearly indicate a total, catastrophic mechanical failure of the braking system." Jasper scoffed loudly, adjusting his silk tie with nervous, jerky movements. "My maintenance logs are absolutely flawless. I spare no expense on my fleet. That truck was perfect." I remained hidden behind the large plow truck, quietly observing his desperate, pathetic lies. My phone suddenly vibrated heavily in my thick jacket pocket. It was exactly 9:45 a.m. The caller ID flashed the name Tom Higgins. I stepped further into the quiet shadows and answered. "Graham, you have to listen to me," Tom whispered, his voice shaking with undeniable terror. "Jasper just called Hazel, the corporate accountant. They are literally shredding the real maintenance requests right now. They are creating fake invoices to make it look like Unit 404 had brand new brakes installed yesterday. Yet they are going to pin this entire catastrophic spill entirely on you and the new kid to protect their massive wealth." A cold, hard smile slowly crept across my deeply weathered face. Jasper was arrogant, but he was incredibly predictable. He thought his immense wealth could simply rewrite reality. He thought he could bury the truth under a mountain of falsified corporate paperwork. "Let them forge whatever they want, Tom," I replied, set my voice steady and deeply calm against the roaring mountain wind. "Just keep your head down and do not sign absolutely anything." I hung up the phone. The corporate blame game had officially begun, but Jasper had absolutely no idea he was playing against a perfectly stacked deck. Chapter 5. Calling in the favor. By 11:30 a.m., I was sitting alone in a quiet, dimly lit diner, roughly 20 miles away from the disastrous frozen mountain pass. The heavy scent of stale coffee and fried bacon hung warmly in the air, a welcome contrast to the toxic chemical fumes I had just escaped. I slid into a cracked red leather booth in the very back, staring intensely at my phone resting on the scratched Formica table. It was finally time to make the single most important phone call of my entire life. I navigated carefully to my secure contacts and pressed dial on a number I had not used in nearly 15 years. The phone rang exactly 3 times before a deep, highly authoritative voice answered. "Adonis Watson, EPA High-Level Environmental Crimes Division." "Mac," I said softly into the receiver, using the old nickname from our earlier days hauling dangerous freight together. "It has been a very long time. It is Graham Kelly." There was a stunned, heavy silence on the other end of the secure line. 15 years ago, Adonis was a rookie driver who nearly lost his life when his rig caught fire during a brutal multi-truck pileup. I had pulled him from the blazing wreckage just seconds before his fuel tanks completely detonated. He had always sworn a permanent life debt to me, promising that if I ever needed absolutely anything, he would drop everything to help. "Graham," Adonis finally breathed. his tone instantly shifting from a strict federal agent to a fiercely loyal old friend. "I owe you my life." Brother, what do you need?" "I need the full, terrifying weight of the federal government," I replied, gripping my warm coffee mug tightly. "My billionaire boss, Jasper Ward, just forced a horribly compromised tanker up Dead Man's Pass. The brakes completely failed on the descent. 10,000 gallons of premium aviation fuel just spilled directly into the protected state watershed." I heard the loud, sharp squeak of a heavy office chair leaning forward rapidly. 10,000 gallons, Graham? That is a massive Tier 1 environmental catastrophe. If the owner knowingly dispatched faulty equipment, he is looking at multi-million-dollar federal fines and serious federal prison time. "He absolutely knew," I confirmed calmly. I had explicitly warned him. Now, his ruthless corporate accountant is currently shredding the genuine maintenance logs to frame the drivers. He is trying to completely bury the evidence. "Not on my watch," Adonis growled. It's the fierce determination irradiating loudly through the phone speaker. "I am instantly mobilizing a heavily armed federal strike team. We will completely lock down his entire corporate headquarters before he can destroy another piece of paper. You just make absolutely sure you have solid proof to back up your incredible claims." "Oh, I have the absolute smoking gun perfectly secured right here," I said, a grim smile forming. "I will see you soon, Mac." I ended the call, and the powerful wheels of absolute federal justice were finally turning. Chapter 6. The Hidden Audio Files. At precisely 8 p.m. that evening, I walked into the sleek, modern downtown law office of Cora Price. Cora was my fierce, highly independent defense attorney who specialized exclusively in brutal labor disputes. The expensive mahogany clock on her wall ticked rhythmically, adding to the intense, heavy anticipation in the room. She sat behind her large glass desk, yet her sharp eyes focused entirely on the glowing screen of my personal laptop. "Jasper is already publicly blaming you on the evening news," Cora stated bluntly, taking a slow sip from her porcelain teacup. "He claims you severely neglected your pre-trip inspection and maliciously abandoned a perfectly functioning truck because you were disgruntled. Hazel, his corporate accountant, miraculously produced signed documents showing the brakes were allegedly replaced 3 days ago. They are building a massive legal fortress, Graham." I leaned back comfortably in the plush leather guest chair, completely unfazed by the terrifying legal threats. "Their entire fortress is built on absolute sand, Cora. Jasper has absolutely no idea about the mandatory personal safety upgrades I made to Unit 404 last year." Cora raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow, leaning forward with sudden, intense curiosity. "What exactly did you do?" Graham?" I reached across the cool glass desk and confidently tapped a specific folder on my laptop screen. "Jasper was always too incredibly cheap to install modern dash cams. So I bought my own. But I didn't just buy a standard forward-facing camera. I installed a hidden, secondary audio-visual recording unit directly above the driver's seat. It continuously records crisp, high-definition audio inside the cab, and more importantly, it instantly uploads everything to a secure, encrypted cloud server in real time." Cora's eyes widened in profound realization. "You recorded the entire conversation this morning?" "Every single arrogant syllable," I confirmed, double-clicking the audio file clearly labeled Dec_12_0432 AM _dispatch_dispute.mp3. The quiet office was suddenly filled with the unmistakable, crystal-clear sound of my own voice echoing through the laptop speakers. "The trailer brakes on 404 are completely gone, Jasper. Said it needs a full service before it touches the highway." Then came Jasper's wealthy, condescending sneer, captured in absolutely perfect high-fidelity audio. "You truck drivers are all exactly the same. You are just liquid haulers. I do not care if it is freezing." We listened in stunned silence as the recording perfectly captured his direct corporate order to drive the dangerously faulty equipment, completely destroying his entire fabricated defense. Yes, the audio clearly proved his undeniable negligence, his absolute malice, and his total disregard for human safety and life. Cora paused the recording, a massive, triumphant grin spreading across her face. The ticking clock suddenly sounded like a loud, joyful countdown. "Graham," she whispered in absolute awe, "this is not just a defense. This is the ultimate corporate execution. We are going to completely ruin Jasper Ward tomorrow morning. I simply nodded, feeling a deep, yet profound sense of absolute justice. The real trap was finally perfectly set. Chapter 7. The Federal Ambush. At exactly 9 a.m. on a crisp, violently bright Tuesday morning, the glass doors of Ward Liquid Logistics headquarters shattered the peaceful corporate illusion. I sat parked securely in Cora Price's sleek sedan directly across the street, gripping a steaming cup of dark roast coffee. The bitter steam warmed my face as I watched the grand, chaotic spectacle unfold. I am Graham Kelly, and I was about to witness the absolute destruction of a tyrant. 4 heavy black armored SUVs screeched aggressively to a halt in the pristine circular driveway, completely ignoring the prominent "Reserved for CEO" signs. Within seconds, a dozen federal agents wearing dark tactical jackets boldly emblazoned with the bright yellow letters EPA, Criminal Investigation Division, poured out onto the manicured pavement. Leading the aggressive charge was Adonis Watson. He looked vastly different from the terrified young driver I had pulled from a burning cab 15 years ago. Today he was a towering, imposing force of absolute federal authority, his face a hardened mask of uncompromising justice. "Look at them go, Graham," Cora whispered from the driver's seat, her eyes shining with fierce, undeniable excitement as she tapped her manicured fingers against the leather steering wheel. I watched intently as Adonis completely bypassed the stunned, stammering security guard in the luxurious marble lobby. The heavy oak doors to the executive suite were unceremoniously shoved open. From my vantage point, through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of the second floor, I could vividly see the sudden, sheer panic erupting inside the wealthy tycoon's empire. Jasper Ward was standing by his massive mahogany desk, casually holding a crystal glass of sparkling water, when the federal agents suddenly swarmed his opulent office. The look of supreme arrogant confidence completely vanished from his flushed face, instantly replaced by a pale, terrified realization. Adonis stepped forward, flashing a shiny federal badge that caught the morning sunlight, and slammed a thick, heavily stamped federal search warrant directly onto the polished wood surface. "This is a massive federal raid, Jasper," I murmured quietly to myself, taking a slow, satisfying sip of my bitter coffee. "Jim, your pathetic little checkbook cannot possibly buy your way out of this incredible disaster." Agents immediately began confiscating the sleek silver laptops, aggressively ripping computer towers from under modern desks, and swiftly securing massive towers of filing cabinets with heavy red tamper-evident tape. They were moving with a precise, terrifying efficiency. Every single falsified maintenance log, every single deleted email, and every single corrupt digital fingerprint was being aggressively seized by the absolute highest authorities in the nation. Jasper was frantically screaming, his arms waving wildly as he desperately tried to block an agent from grabbing his personal tablet. It was a pathetic, deeply humiliating display of a shattered ego. The billionaire fleet tycoon, who had coldly fired me on a freezing mountain pass just 24 hours ago, was now completely powerless. And the ultimate ambush was flawlessly executed, and the devastating trap had snapped shut with bone-crushing force. Chapter 8. Panic in the Dispatch Room. At 9:35 a.m., my secure cell phone buzzed violently in my heavy winter coat pocket. It was Adonis. "The perimeter is completely secured, Graham," his deep voice rumbled through the speaker. "Bring your attorney. It is time for you to formally identify the key players and deliver the evidence." Cora and I swiftly crossed the busy street, the cold morning wind biting sharply against my weathered cheeks. We walked directly through the shattered illusion of Jasper's corporate empire. The once intimidating marble lobby now felt like a chaotic, heavily guarded crime scene. We took the glass elevator straight down to the basement-level dispatch nerve center. The heavy metal door to the dispatch room was propped wide open by a federal agent. Inside, the atmosphere was suffocatingly tense. It's smelling strongly of burnt coffee and absolute undeniable fear. Tom Higgins, the cowardly dispatch supervisor, was sitting at his crowded desk, with his head buried deeply in his trembling hands. His multiple glowing monitors, usually tracking hundreds of liquid tankers, were completely locked out by federal encryption screens. Across the cramped room stood Hazel, the ruthless corporate accountant. She was usually a picture of cold, calculating efficiency, always armed with a cruel smirk. Now, she was backed aggressively against a filing cabinet, clutching a shredded stack of the forged maintenance invoices to her chest like a useless shield. Her perfectly applied makeup was smudged, revealing the deep, terrified lines of a woman facing severe consequences. I stepped into the room, my heavy boots thudding loudly against the linoleum floor. Tom slowly raised his head, his red, tear-streaked eyes widening in absolute shock. "Graham," Tom choked out, his voice cracking into a pathetic whimper. "I tried to tell them, Graham. I swear I tried to stop her from shredding the real documents." Hazel shot him a venomous, panicked glare. "Shut your pathetic mouth, Tom! You are going to ruin us!" Adonis stepped out from the shadows of the server rack, a sealed plastic evidence bag dangling from his large hand. "You are already ruined, ma'am," he stated coldly. "We recovered the shredded strips. And our cyber team is currently extracting the original break inspection files from your deleted cloud server." I walked slowly toward Tom's desk, placing both of my large, calloused hands firmly on the edge. I leaned in close, staring directly into his terrified eyes. "I explicitly warned you, Tom," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper that cut through the room. "I told you to simply log the critical break failure. Instead, you chose to protect a billionaire's wallet over a young driver's life." They were finally realizing that their unwavering loyalty to a corrupt, greedy tycoon had bought them absolutely nothing but a guaranteed one-way ticket to federal prison. The absolute panic in the dispatch room was thick, heavy, and incredibly satisfying. The walls they had built with lies and forged signatures were violently crashing down around them, crushing their corporate careers into absolute dust. By Chapter 9, the EPA Steps In. By exactly 11:15 a.m., the chaotic scene shifted back upstairs to the luxurious, sprawling executive boardroom. The massive, polished mahogany table, usually reserved for aggressive corporate takeovers and greedy profit discussions, was now completely covered in stark, terrifying federal documents. I sat confidently beside Cora, my posture relaxed but vigilant, watching the spectacular downfall of the man who had abandoned me in the freezing snow. Jasper Ward was forcibly seated at the far end of his own table, guarded by two heavily armed federal agents. His expensive designer silk tie was completely unraveled, and his normally perfectly slicked hair was a wild, frantic mess. He looked remarkably small, entirely stripped of his arrogant billionaire armor. Adonis stood tall at the head of the table, projecting an overwhelming aura of absolute, uncompromising authority. He slammed a massive, thick binder aggressively onto the polished wood. The incredibly loud noise echoed sharply through the cavernous boardroom, making Jasper violently flinch in his plush leather chair. "Mr. Ward," Adonis began, his deep voice rumbling with pure righteous anger, "let us discuss the devastating environmental reality of your incredible greed. Exactly 10,000 gallons of premium aviation fuel poured directly into the pristine Dead Man's Pass watershed this morning. That chemical spill has officially breached the state reservoir supply lines." Jasper wiped a thick, nervous bead of sweat from his pale forehead. "My insurance will completely cover the cleanup costs," he stammered weakly, his voice entirely devoid of its usual condescending venom. "It was just a terrible, unpredictable accident." "It was absolutely not an accident," Cora interjected sharply, sliding my sleek silver laptop precisely to the center of the massive table. "It was a deliberate, yet calculated corporate crime." Cora pressed the play button. Once again, the crystal-clear, undeniable audio recording of my desperate warnings and Jasper's cruel, arrogant dismissal echoed loudly through the silent boardroom. I watched Jasper's pale face drain of all remaining color as he heard his own voice strictly ordering me to drive the deadly, critically compromised tanker. "Under the strict federal regulations of the Environmental Protection Agency," Adonis continued, completely ignoring Jasper's pathetic gasp of sheer terror, "knowingly dispatching critically unsafe equipment that directly results in a Tier 1 hazardous materials catastrophe carries massive mandatory penalties. You are hereby officially fined $2.5 million per spilled gallon, Mr. Ward." Jasper's jaw dropped open in absolute paralyzed horror. I did the rapid mental math. That was $25 billion. It was a sum so incredibly astronomical that it would instantly vaporize his entire corporate empire, his personal offshore bank accounts, and his sprawling luxury estates. Furthermore, Adonis added coldly, his eyes narrowing into dangerous, unforgiving slits, "you are officially under arrest for massive corporate fraud, severe criminal negligence, and massive environmental sabotage. Your days of treating hardworking truck drivers like disposable liquid haulers are permanently over. The brutal reality of the EPA's terrifying power had finally arrived, completely destroying him. Chapter 10. The Settlement Trap. By 2 p.m. on a freezing, heavily overcast Thursday afternoon, the oppressive atmosphere inside the federal holding facility was a stark, brutal contrast to Jasper Ward's usual opulent luxury. I sat across a dented, incredibly cold steel table from him, permanently separated by thick, heavily reinforced security glass. Cora Price sat calmly to my left, her expensive leather briefcase resting perfectly on the scratched metal surface. Jasper had desperately begged for this emergency legal meeting through his terrified, high-priced defense attorneys. He looked like a completely shattered, fundamentally broken man. His custom designer suit was incredibly wrinkled and stained, and the harsh, yet continuously buzzing fluorescent lights directly overhead highlighted the incredibly deep, dark, exhausted bags under his desperate, pleading eyes. "Graham, please," Jasper practically whimpered, his voice a pathetic, severely trembling whisper, echoing through the small metal speaker grate. "I can easily make this all go away for you today. I will write you a personal, certified bank check for $5 million right now, completely tax-free. You can comfortably retire to a beautifully warm, tropical beach and never have to look at another dirty, dangerous tanker again. Just officially tell the EPA investigators that the hidden audio recording was somehow technologically altered or taken completely out of professional context." I stared intently at the desperate, ruined billionaire, feeling the cold, hard steel of the interrogation table pressing sharply against my forearms. The sheer, unadulterated, breathtaking arrogance it took to illegally offer me a massive financial bribe inside a highly secure federal building was utterly staggering. He still genuinely, pathetically believed that every single living person had a visible price tag attached directly to their personal morality. $5 million is an incredibly massive amount of money, Jasper, I replied slowly, keeping my weathered voice perfectly flat and entirely devoid of any sympathy or emotion. I deliberately leaned in much closer to the smudged, thick security glass. "But your dirty money cannot possibly buy back the pristine, beautiful mountain river you completely destroyed with toxic chemicals yesterday. It absolutely cannot buy back the sheer, unadulterated terror that young kid felt when his heavy brakes totally failed on a deadly 10% downgrade." Jasper's lead defense lawyer, a incredibly slick, nervous man smelling heavily of cheap cologne, leaned aggressively into the small microphone. "Mr. Kelly, we strongly, legally advise you to take this incredibly generous, unprecedented financial settlement. If this goes to a lengthy, highly publicized, drawn-out federal jury trial, we will absolutely drag your professional name completely through the mud. We will loudly claim you were a deeply disgruntled, highly unstable, and aggressively vindictive former employee." Cora laughed out loud, a sharp, incredibly cold, a cutting sound that echoed loudly off the bleak gray concrete walls. "You have absolutely zero legal leverage left, counselor. My client is already officially, permanently protected under the strictest federal whistleblower statutes. Your empty threats are completely useless here." I stood up slowly, pushing my heavy metal chair back with a loud, piercing, aggressive scrape against the concrete floor. "This was never a real negotiation, Jasper. If this meeting was simply a psychological trap to finally see if you had learned absolutely anything at all from this catastrophic disaster, you clearly haven't." I firmly tapped the thick, reinforced security glass directly in front of his pale, heavily sweating, terrified face. "Keep your incredibly dirty, blood-soaked money. I am going to proudly watch the powerful federal government systematically, ruthlessly dismantle every single piece of your corrupt, greedy empire, said brick by luxurious brick. You built a massive kingdom directly on the tired backs of hard-working, honest drivers, and now the absolute crushing weight of your own incredible greed is grinding you into absolute dust. Enjoy your brand new concrete suite." I permanently turned my back on his pathetic, echoing sobbing, and confidently walked out of the bleak, depressing visitation room. As I stepped firmly out into the incredibly bright, freezing afternoon sun, the crisp, yet wonderfully clean winter air deeply filled my lungs. The incredibly heavy, toxic, emotional burden of the past few chaotic days finally lifted completely from my tired shoulders, instantly replaced by a profound, undeniable, and deeply satisfying sense of absolute, uncompromising victory. The federal trap had worked absolutely flawlessly, sealing his permanent, miserable fate forever. Chapter 11, An Empire Crumbles. At exactly 10:30 a.m., 3 agonizingly long, and heavily documented months after the catastrophic Mountain Pass fuel spill, the massive, heavy oak doors of the downtown federal bankruptcy court swung wide open. The crisp, wonderfully cool air of early spring violently rushed into the incredibly crowded, tension-filled, heavily guarded courtroom. I sat quietly and respectfully in the heavy wooden gallery pew, wearing a simple, clean, perfectly pressed suit, while Cora Price sat confidently beside me, diligently reviewing her absolutely flawless, meticulously organized legal notes. Jasper Ward's massive, highly corrupt, multi-billion-dollar corporate empire was officially breathing its very last, desperate, pathetic gasp. The harsh, undeniably brutal, and permanent reality of the Environmental Protection Agency's astronomical fines had completely and permanently obliterated his vast, aggressively hoarded fortune. The presiding federal judge, an incredibly stern and no-nonsense woman with piercing, unforgiving gray eyes, methodically and loudly read through the devastating multi-billion-dollar financial penalties. Jasper was obviously not physically present in the courtroom. He was currently sitting securely inside a maximum security federal penitentiary, already serving a lengthy, mandatory 20-year sentence for massive, coordinated corporate fraud and severe, catastrophic environmental sabotage. His former ruthless corporate accountant, Hazel, he had completely and selfishly turned state's evidence directly against him to desperately avoid a similar miserable fate, providing the FBI with absolute undeniable proof of his decades-long systematic maintenance forgery schemes. Due to the sheer, absolutely astronomical, unprecedented magnitude of the federal environmental fines levied against this corporation, the judge announced loudly, her powerful, highly authoritative voice echoing sharply off the high, ornate, the beautifully vaulted ceiling. The entirety of Ward Liquid Logistics, including all of its remaining physical fleet assets, its highly valuable, nationwide commercial real estate, and all of its lucrative active government shipping contracts, will be immediately and permanently liquidated at a highly secure, closed-door federal auction. The incredibly loud, highly decisive, and permanent crack of the judge's heavy wooden gavel sounded exactly like a massive, final gunshot, completely ending a long, incredibly brutal, deeply exhausting war. I slowly let out an incredibly long, deeply satisfying breath, physically feeling the incredible, heavy weight of this monumental moment settling deeply into my tired bones. Jasper's sprawling, luxurious vacation homes, his incredibly sleek private corporate jets, and his massive, dangerously compromised fleet of liquid tankers were all completely, permanently gone, aggressively seized by the uncompromising and incredibly heavy hands of absolute federal justice. At exactly 1 p.m., I walked incredibly purposefully into the brightly lit, heavily secured federal auction hall located just 3 short city blocks away. The massive room was entirely packed with eager, incredibly wealthy corporate investors and ruthless rival fleet owners, all desperately hoping to violently scavenge the highly valuable, shattered remains of Jasper's former, deeply corrupt kingdom. Yes, the air hummed aggressively with the anxious sound of quiet, calculating whispers and the rapid shuffling of heavy, incredibly detailed financial documents. I calmly took my specifically assigned seat near the very front row, my chest rising and falling with a remarkably steady, rhythmic, and incredibly fierce determination. Adonis Watson, dressed impeccably in his sharp, deeply intimidating federal agent suit, gave me a highly subtle, as incredibly respectful nod of acknowledgement from directly across the crowded, tense aisle. The professional auctioneer stepped up confidently to the massive, elevated wooden podium, aggressively adjusting his small microphone with a lewd, incredibly piercing, screeching pop of electrical static. "Ladies and gentlemen," the auctioneer began rapidly, his sharp eyes scanning the incredibly wealthy, eager crowd, "we are officially starting the final, absolute bidding process for the complete and totally remaining operational assets of Ward Liquid Logistics." The fierce, incredibly aggressive, high-stakes financial bidding war instantly erupted entirely around me, massive numbers flying rapidly through the incredibly tense air like high-speed bullets. But I sat perfectly, remarkably still, firmly holding my small, bright white numbered bidding paddle, waiting incredibly patiently for the perfect, highly calculated absolute final moment to decisively strike my ultimate, a devastating blow. The absolute total destruction of a terrible tyrant was now entirely complete, but the true, incredibly profound and ultimate justice was just about to dramatically begin right here in this very room. Chapter 12. The New Fleet Owner. At exactly 4 p.m., the incredibly massive, heavily crowded Federal Auction Hall went completely, absolutely silent as my bright white numbered tattleseers shot swiftly into the crisp, conditioned air, thanks to the massive, multi-million-dollar federal whistleblower bounty officially awarded to me by the EPA for bravely exposing the devastating corporate fraud. My personal financial resources were now incredibly vast. I confidently placed the final, completely unassailable bid that echoed loudly off the walls. The heavy wooden gavel slammed down violently onto the podium one last, decisive time. I, Graham Kelly, a simple, hard-working liquid hauler who was so coldly fired on a freezing, treacherous mountain pass, was now the sole, absolute, and undisputed owner of the very massive fleet that had cruelly betrayed me.